It reminds me of the outlook, and again, just how it was seeing, in my opinion, just how devastating the DEI programs and all of these things are with the California fires that have recently been going on at the moment, where I think it was the either chief superintendent or whatever rank it was, or whatever rank they were, whatever they are, and they were saying that if I'm not strong enough or whatever, you know, it doesn't matter about my merit or anything like that. If they're in a position, you know, it's their fault. I can't remember the exact quote.
It shouldn't have been there. Shouldn't have been. Your husband should not be in the building. Yeah.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better. Is she strong enough to do this? Or, you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire. Which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
Classic example of, you know, the DEI hire of this person that, oh yeah, if that person's in a position where they're getting burned to death and I can't get to them, it's their fault.
It's their fault, yeah.
And
she actually said that, yeah. She said that.
Yeah,
now, it may have been comedic. It may have been her attempt at some light humour. She was a big woman herself, of course. Let's not argue with that, you know. And I think also one of them is being paid like $700,000 a year. I mean, you have to remember, when we talk about red lines, Reagan was quite an interesting one. I'm glad you brought him up, because when you read some of what he's said, his speeches and stuff, I miss those times. I'm not saying they were perfect, but, you know, the 80s, the 90s, I think the 90s were probably, well, if I think about the 90s were probably the best. But either way, I'm just saying I was born mid-70s. I don't remember much about the 70s or 80s, but the 90s I do remember.
Wish I'd have known.
Well, you know, I joined the Navy back in '93, and it was very pure. I didn't have a phone. You know, I drove a Mini from Dartmouth back to Guildford, where my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, was. You know, I've been the same woman since I was 19 years old. I think I'm quite fortunate in that regard to be with the same woman since I was 19. But when Reagan said that, you know, I'm going to sack all the air traffickers for going on strike. And then when you look at like Obama with the red lines in Syria, if you do this is a red line. That happened. Assad did this, and I think it was the gas with the barrel bombs. And Obama didn't do anything. And now, from now on, we can disregard anything Obama said, you know, because he's not going to do it. So I think sometimes you've got to say, right, I'm going to make this threat. I'm going to make this threat. I remember I was in a job and they said to me, unless you take your YouTube channel down, we're going to have to let you go. Fuck off. What the fuck already? They don't realize who I am. Like, I'm going to double down on my YouTube channel now. I will sack this job off and I'll go back to working. I'll push trolleys back in Asda again, because that's where I started off from. All right. And that's an honest job. I know that because I did it for like 3 years when I was at university, and afterwards you just collect trolleys, you bring them back again. I'm not going to take down a YouTube channel because that is against, I'll be honest with you. I think speech is more important, and it's probably a very naive thing. We die poor, but we still die wrapped in a flag as honourable men. And I don't think we have honourable men anymore. Point out an honourable man to me. I'm struggling. I'd say Rupert Lowe would probably be one. I think Farage is struggling. I think, was it Zia? I think he's a good guy. I think Ben, I like what Ben says, you know, Ben Habib. But I think, you know, there aren't really many people I look at anymore. And they should inspire us to do better things.
Yes.
And I don't see politicians. I don't see military leaders. I see the odd one or two military leaders. I see some Americans as well that I'm very interested in, and some guys in some other militaries as well. But there's rare, and I used to, when I was growing up in the military, we had characters in command. And everyone knew, oh, that guy, no, he's amazing. I remember I'm sorry, I'll just spin this. I remember I was in a wardroom down in Devonport, and a man walked in, and we're all young fighter pilots in the Navy, you know, in training, but we all got the flight suits on and we're all drinking. And it was a naval base. It was Plymouth, so it was submarines, and I think it was mainly surface vessels. But this guy came in, everyone was quiet, and I was like, you're all drinking. I was like, who's that guy? They were like, that guy is he's like the most senior submarine captain in the Navy. It was like Goddard walked in. Everyone was so like, that's the kind of guy. We don't have these people anymore. They just don't exist in society. And I don't know why. I just think people aren't speaking out. People are too afraid. They're too worried about what the pushback's going to be. But allow it to happen. That's how we learn, isn't it? We say something and someone criticizes us and we go, think about that. Happened to be last night. Someone talked about my drinking on YouTube. I wrote a comment on it. And I was like, he said, we don't need to hear about your drinking, Tim, because some of us can drink and not fail at life. And I just went, no, but, you know, fair enough. I got triggered by it. I was like, I'll think about that. I'll think about that comment. That's how we learn things, isn't it? And I'm like, hang on, I flew fast jets all the time for 20 years whilst fucking drunk out of my head, like everyone else did, by the way, because that's the Air Force we're in. That takes a certain amount of skill to balance that. And I could talk about drugs and everything else and alcohol and how hard it is to be addicted to drugs and still do a job like that if people are interested. But or alcohol, not drugs, you know what I mean? But I'm talking about the same thing. But that,
No, absolutely.
we have to have these conversations, and I don't think people want to have these conversations anymore. They're just happy to try and live a perfect existence, and so people can think they're great. I'm not. I'm fundamentally flawed. I put my hand up, the first guy to. I'm fundamentally flawed. I'm trying to do better, and that's all I'm asking of people is just try and do better. You're an Englishman, right? Or you're a Welshman, or a Scotsman, or you're an Irishman. Let's try and do better. Like, if you do better, your family does better, your community does better. Why? Because they look up to you and they want to be part of what you're driving, and they're proud for you to be part of the circle, even if you are wrong. Sometimes you say wrong. It just doesn't happen. And I think unless we get back to that foundational element of what it means to be a good citizen, there we go, we've said it, a good citizen, which means we don't touch up 5-year-old kids. And if we find people that do, by the way, we do something about it. We don't tolerate that within our communities. You know what I mean?
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
We shouldn't. And I think it gets to the point where it's like, right, have we found a bunch of people that are touching 5-year-olds? Yes. Where are the men at? Oh, the men are here. Are we tooled up? Let's go and smash the place down. But I'm not advocating that, George, because we can never advocate incitement to violence. I'm not saying we do that. And it's very important we don't do that, of course, because that is against the law, and we all understand that. But we're getting to the point where the law doesn't do anything. The law cannot do anything. It's not big enough, it's not powerful enough, or the judiciary won't support it. Yes. What happens then? Two things happen then. The first, we allow it to happen then. The second is that we don't allow it to happen. And that's what we got to look at. The first one is we allow the police and the judiciary and everything else to not deport these people and for them to roam the streets, potentially touching up 5-year-old kids again, or raping schoolgirls, blah, blah. The second one is we all do something about it, but we all go to jail. And it's going to come down to that, unfortunately. I think at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to unless we, and that of course is a foundational. That's when we literally go into riots and everything else, which no one can condone. That's why people were locked up for those Facebook posts, weren't they? Because that were advocating, and of course we can't do that. But you can see how society would break down along those lines if we lose the ability to obviously make a society as it should be.
It's just the classic example, and you look at any example throughout history of, the USSR, Cambodia, where the government decided to turn on its people, and that's ultimately what we're seeing, and it just makes you think, where is this heading, and obviously, as you said, what can we do about it? And I think the biggest thing that we can do on a personal level. Another Peterson chapter in his book where he says, put your house in order before you criticize the world, or put your house in order before you go fixing the world, these kinds of things, clean your room, those kinds of things.
Yes.
Is that people being willing to stand on principle, like you said you were willing to do when whoever it was that said to you, you need to take your channel down or you're going to lose this job, these kinds of things. And it reminds me of a personal example for me, where I decided to leave one of the jobs that I was in, one of the roles where I was in, where I'd been there for nearly 10 years. But in all of my nearly 10 years there, it was the first time within this, time that I was there that they were showing that they were going to start bringing in these diversity and equity trainings into our regular training sessions that we done every single month. They were trying to get us, so they made the people that stayed there, I didn't do mine in the end because I left, they had to write pledges, literal pledges, and that's the word they use, on how they were going to contribute to net zero and these kinds of things in the workplace.
What? Really?
We are just rec assistants and lifeguards, and these are the things that being had to do. In all of I was there for I left towards the tail end of last year, so 8.5 years I was there. This is the first time in 8.5 years that I'd ever seen it, and I'm there thinking, at the very least, nobody else can see it, but I can see the writing on the wall. I'm like, I know where this is going. I know this is just the tip of the iceberg. And the fact that they called it a pledge, they said, make sure you do your pledges, your carbon pledges or your net zero pledges. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this.
This is a job, though, isn't it? It's like, what happens in the days when you turn up at 9 o'clock and you work for the job they want you to work? Tim, I want you to come here, pick up trolleys in Asda car park. I'll do that. I'll put the Asda thing on, I'll go and get them. And at 5 o'clock, I want you to go home, 9 to 5. That's a job. When we start saying, and you need to pledge to manifest a greener lifestyle and what you're doing, that's not a job anymore. It's
the first time I'd ever seen politics being forced onto people within my workplace, and I was like, I'm not about this.
Well, in RF Bryce Norton, Claire O'Grady was the station commander at the time, and I know her husband and Claire quite well, but she managed to get, I think, the only rainbow crossing drawn on any base in the whole of Europe. She got one drawn on the, and I remember when I challenged her on this. It was outside the nursery, and I think they said, "Oh, it's to do with the kids. It's rainbow, isn't it?" And then I literally got Bryce Norton's front of their webpage up, and it said about diversity. We've even drawn a rainbow DEI crossing in front of. I'm like, these are children. They're kids. Mm-hmm. You're trying to enforce this degenerate thing onto children, and I will say it's degenerate. Just go and watch a Pride March. Tell me it's not degenerate. Watch a Pride March. Take young children to a Pride March, and if you're a Christian man, if you're a conservative man, you'll be like this in front of their eyes. You're like, don't look at this, because you've got people walking down there in hardly any clothes on at all. You know? Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's degenerate.
I was going to try and find it for when I'm editing another episode of the podcast where I was talking about, it was an image which circulated around X a little while ago. Again, you're never going to see any of this through like mainstream media or legacy media channels or anything like that. You're never going to see that. I think that's one of the biggest things as well. The legacy media apparatus I think it's slowly collapsing, but it's been so strong for so long that's what's contributed to a lot of the social indoctrination that we have. But there were people holding pro-pedophilia signs at pride flags all the way back when they were at Pride marches all the way back as far as they were, and admittedly they may have been a fringe, don't get me wrong, but we've already, and people were saying, slippery slope and all of these things, but this is hard to deny the normalization of those certain things now, or at least the attempted normalization of certain things. And people like, is it Harriet Harman? I believe her name is one of the ex-Labour councillors that was affiliated with a pro-pedophilia organisation.
It was PI, wasn't it? Yeah, the paedophile information exchange, wasn't it?